Hi everyone, welcome. I think we will make a start. There's still a few people joining, but we'll get straight into the seminar because we've got quite a lot to cover this afternoon. So thank you all. My name is Natalie Merrett and I'm the Head of Knowledge Dissemination in the Schools Division at Anna Freud. I'd like to warmly welcome you to our seminar this afternoon, which will focus on how education staff can support students seeking refuge and asylum. If you've never been to one of our seminars before, we host them termly and we focus on current topical issues which relate to mental health and education. I'm going to move on to some quick housekeeping before we start. So this afternoon's seminar will be in a webinar format, which means all attendee microphones and cameras are switched off. If you would like to submit a question to our speakers, please do pop this into the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. Our support team will be monitoring the Q&A, so if you have any technical questions, just let us know. If you wish to enable closed captioning during the webinar, you can also click at the bottom to the show captions icon, and that will enable captions to show on the screen for you. And then moving on to the actual recording of the seminar. So this seminar will be recorded and shared on the Anna Freud YouTube channel in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And where we have permission from speakers, we'll be sharing the presentation slides with you also. And then a final in relation to socials, if you're tweeting, our handle is on the screen. It's at AFNCCF. Please do tag us and use the Schools in Mind hashtag. So this afternoon, I'm delighted to be joined by an experienced panel of speakers. You'll see the agenda on the screen. This evening, they're going to be exploring the important role that schools can play in recognising and responding to trauma in children and young people who are displaced and seeking refuge or asylum. In addition, we'll be hearing from Luwam, a youth ambassador, about their own experiences of seeking asylum and refuge in the UK. Some of the content shared or topics touched on could be triggering for audience members, so please do whatever you need to look after yourself. So whether that be taking a break or if you feel like you need to, leaving, that's absolutely fine. And just moving on to talk a bit about the UK Trauma Council. So we'll be talking to our colleague Beck Ferrari from the UK Trauma Council later on. But the UK Trauma Council is supported and hosted by Anna Freud. They create evidence-based resources to improve professionals' and carers' understanding of the nature and impact of trauma. Most recently, they've been developing a set of resources about childhood trauma, war and conflict, and we're very excited that they actually launched today, and Beck will be talking to you about them later on. The project involved extensive partnership working with many schools and organisations with expertise in supporting children seeking refuge and asylum. And young people with lived experience also played a vital role as co-producers of these resources. And as you can see from the timetable, we'll have plenty of time at the end of the seminar for a Q&A with our speakers. As mentioned earlier, please do add your questions to the Q&A box and we'll do our best to get to as many of them as possible. Before I hand over to our wonderful speakers, I wanted to also highlight a new resource hub that we've launched within the schools division. So on the screen, you'll see a couple of screenshots from the resource hub, which we launched this week. If you're a senior mental health lead or in a similar role, you may be interested to know about it and explore it. It's actually a filterable resource library, which is hosted on our Mentally Healthy Schools website, and we'll put the link into the chat for you now. So this resource hub was created in partnership with and funded by the Department for Education, and it contains practical resources from trusted providers and organisations which support mental health leads to embed a whole school or college approach. Please do have a look and let us know what you think. We hope it will be very useful. So back to the agenda this afternoon. So to kick off tonight's seminar, I'm really, really pleased to be able to introduce you to my talented colleague, Beck Ferrari. She's a cognitive behavioural therapy practitioner who specialises in trauma and bereavement. Beck is currently the clinical content lead at the UK Trauma Council and has developed resources around traumatic bereavement, critical incidents in education communities, and now the latest portfolio, which is launching today, which is about trauma in children and young people seeking refuge and asylum. Beck has worked as both a teacher and a Senko, and then spent 5 years heading up a child bereavement service for her local authority. She's the co-author of a recently published book for bereaved teenagers, My Grief Handbook, Why Grief Hurts and How to Cope. Thank you for joining us this evening, Beck. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Natalie, for that lovely introduction. And I was getting ready with my timer on my phone to try and stick to the timings we've got for everyone this afternoon to make sure I don't take unfair advantage of going first tonight. Really lovely to have so many of you on the call and so many of you showing an interest in supporting the needs of bereaved children and young people. In a moment, I'm going to share our new resource in a bit more detail and share our new animation. But first, I'm going to start with a little bit more of information about the UK Trauma Council itself and what we do. So just bear with me while I bring my slides up. So the UK Trauma Council, for any of you that don't know, is a council and a team that really are all around improving the support that children and young people receive who've experienced trauma. We don't do that within the UK Trauma Council in kind of direct work, but we do that by developing resources, mainly for professionals, teachers, social workers, therapists, but actually more recently also with parents and young people in particular for this resource as well. All our resources are free and they're based in the latest research and evidence as well. And we do a whole host of other training. We co-create with the intended users the different portfolios. We talk with the people who they're for to make sure hopefully we're meeting the need as they see it and not necessarily how we see it. And we work with young people where possible, and I'll be sharing a little bit about that with you as we go through my presentation this afternoon. We also have a youth advisory board newly formed this year, which has been great for us to have a group of young people with lived experience of trauma working with us to think about our direction and what we're putting out, and for them to comment on what we're putting out, and hopefully they'll be developing some resources as well early in the new year. And the council itself is made up of 22 experts in childhood trauma from across the 4 nations of the UK and from across different disciplines, so from academics and researchers to clinicians and people who head up the National Children's Bureau and Quorum adoption support. So we've got a whole range of different professionals there that really guide and support our work. Just going to mention a few things that we've got, particularly for schools and colleges, as that's the audience for tonight. We've got 2 resources around childhood trauma in the brain. So if you're interested in understanding more about how a child's brain might adapt following trauma and maltreatment, that really can help you understand that, and then think with the second resource in that about how that can impact on their relationships and ability to interact with others. We've got our critical incidents resources. That looks like I've got those the wrong way around, doesn't it? Which are all about helping schools and colleges and preschool early year settings to really think about how you can respond if there's been a critical incident that's affected your whole community. And there's a whole set of different resources there, and also around traumatic bereavement to help schools think about how it can be more complex for a child or young person who's been bereaved and where they're kind of experiencing trauma that's really disrupting their ability to adjust and manage their grief. So they're just a few things that you might want to look up at some point. But before we go into the session today any further, and Natalie already mentioned this, really want you to think about self-care today. I know you've signed up and you know what we're here for, but I really want you to think about hearing about and thinking about trauma. It can be difficult at times and distressing. So really invite you to do what you need to take care of yourself. If that means stepping away for a moment or deciding actually today's not the day for this, maybe I'll catch up with the recording. And as part of that, really thinking about self-care also gets me thinking about use of language. I'm really hoping that the way I use words is inclusive and respectful and thoughtful. And I invite you to let me know where I could improve. If there are terms and phrases I use that you might think, oh, I'm not sure about that, then please let me know. And they're things that I can take forward in my learning and in my future kind of presenting it and talks that I give. So let me tell you about our new resources. In fact, when we booked this seminar, we didn't know that this would be the exact launch date, but as things panned out over the next couple of months, it is actually today that things have been released. So our new resources around childhood trauma, migration and asylum feature an animation which is designed for young people to help them really make sense of how trauma might be impacting on them, and their first steps, what their first steps might be to beginning to cope with that. And as you can see there, it's been translated into a number of languages, including voiceovers and subtitles, so that we're beginning that hopefully to make it as accessible as we can to young people. Alongside that, there's a toolkit for educational communities that I'll be dipping into today, and really thinking about how those in education can help recognise and respond to trauma in children and young people. And we'll be thinking about self-care for you as well in terms of doing that. And then just alongside, there's also a community organisations toolkit, but there isn't time to talk about that one today. And there's a resource for young people. So certainly if you work with young people of secondary age and college age, that self-help resource might be useful for young people to start recognising what's happening to them and begin to think about how they can cope in the moment with some of those overwhelming emotions that they might be experiencing. So before we go any further, I'd like to share our new animation, Childhood Trauma, War and Conflict. And just to give you a little bit of the context, we've been working on this for, in fact, just over a year when we first started making partnerships with some of the key organisations that have been so vital in steering our understanding and sharing their expertise. In particular, I'll mention Kent Refugee Action Network, Karan, and we'll be hearing from Luwam later. Nottingham Education Sanctuary Team, Nest, and Beth is joining us. St Mary's Ukrainian School welcomed us for a day, and we spent a wonderful day with their staff, parents and young people, finding out about the experience of young people who've had to leave Ukraine because of the war there. We're also supported by Mellors Primary School and the British Red Cross, and that's just to name a few. And there's a whole long list of acknowledgements in the back of the resources of all the people we've been able to work with. So I'm going to stop sharing my slides because I hope we're able to bring up the animation and share that with you just for 3.5 minutes. Thank you.
This is a short story about how war and conflict can affect the way young people see themselves and the world around them.
This is also a story about seeing a future after these experiences.
The content may be emotionally difficult.
Please think about how you feel before watching.
It happens when I least expect it. I can be out having fun with my friend when out of nowhere, a noise or smell pulls me back into the past. No one else can see the cracks in my world, but they're always there.
I hide myself away, but the memories always find me. The more I ignore them, the larger they become. The world feels broken. My head aches.
I want to fit in. I try to act normally. But I never know when something will suddenly shatter my world into pieces. My past won't leave me alone. I feel so angry all the time.
Life is hard here. I'm always so tired, but I'm too scared to sleep. Because that's when the nightmares come. Make it stop.
I feel trapped.
Why do I feel so angry?
Make it stop.
I hate it here.
I can't sleep. I'm scared.
I feel
Why
trapped.
do I feel
Leave
so
me alone.
I
angry?
feel trapped.
Scared.
There was a moment when I decided to stop pushing the thoughts away. I began to face my fears. I realized that I could change. That I could start to take control.
All these pieces are parts of who I am, but they don't tell my whole story.
Sometimes life is hard. Yet I can always find something to be thankful for.
The painful feelings after war and conflict are there for all of us. But they don't last forever. Each day is an opportunity for change.
Although it can be easier to keep things buried, finding even one person you feel safe with, who understands your story, can really help. It's possible to learn something even from the most difficult of experiences.
It can take time to put the pieces back together and to realize that although the past will always be a part of you, it doesn't have to define you.
Your memories may shape you, but they are not your future.
So what about you?
What will be your next step?
To find out more, visit here.
Thank you for taking a moment to watch that. I'm aware that maybe the sound was lagging a little bit and I couldn't quite hear the music. So if you have a chance to watch this in your own time and share it, it may be that sharing it across such a big platform is just causing a little bit of lagging there. But hopefully you've got the part of the story and what we're trying to kind of communicate to help normalise some of those reactions for young people that have experienced trauma and had to leave their home because it wasn't safe. So I'm going to head back to our slides so that I can tell you a little bit more from my presentation this evening. Really want to tell you about the toolkit for educational communities. As I mentioned, it's about helping young people, helping staff recognise trauma reactions in children and young people. What would we notice? One of our big learnings from spending time with young people with lived experiences, is that they may well make sense of what they're experiencing in terms of physical reactions, that they might complain that they're having headaches or backaches or stomach aches, and really look to their physical symptoms and maybe not make that link that I would about how you're feeling physically might be because of how you're feeling emotionally. And we really want to support educational professionals to kind of develop that environment that best responds to their needs and supports their recovery. And we're doing that. We're not suggesting that schools and colleges do anything more than they already do, but thinking about the things you're already doing and how you can kind of tweak those interactions. And hopefully for many of you, to reassure you that many of the things you're doing are already really supportive and in line with what the research says is really helpful for recovery. There's also a section on when to refer on for specialist help when you might be that little bit more worried and actually you're not seeing some of the recovery as that we might want to. And there's a section there about self-care for staff and thinking about vicarious trauma and vicarious resilience, and I'll mention a little bit of those further on. I want to start by thinking about the range of traumatic experiences that children and young people seeking asylum may have gone through. And of course, their stories will all be individual, but there might be some commonalities to some of the things they've experienced. And one piece of research suggests that children that are seeking asylum have been through potentially 8 or more traumatic events. And they might be part of what happened in their country of origin, might be part of what happened on their migration journey, and might be partly due to what's happened to them in the UK. So actually we're looking at a whole timeline potentially of trauma and of different things happening. And one of the tricky things when we're working in schools, I think, is that these children and young people are unlikely to come with a file of records that we might want to help us go, oh, okay, that's what's happened to them, or now I understand. They're unlikely to come with any records at all. And on top of that, are unlikely to be able to communicate to us some of the experiences they've had. And even if they had enough English to, they may not be in a position to, because actually they may not want to remember and think about or talk about the very things that have caused them such distress and pain in the past. So really for us, thinking about that working in the dark when we're not quite sure what's happened, it's also important that we avoid assumptions. Just because someone's been through traumatic events doesn't mean that post-traumatic stress or mental health difficulties are inevitable. Some young people will have enduring difficulties, but some won't. And of course, neither are they the only difficulties a child or young person might have. They may also have, or instead have, difficulties in terms of developmental progress, their language needs, their learning. They might be neurodivergent. So it's important we don't place all the emphasis on trauma, or equally all the emphasis on additional needs, but think about at a very individual basis about what children are experiencing. And remembering, it doesn't define someone. having experience of migration and asylum might be a really, you know, key significant part of their story, but it doesn't define them. So making sure we're thinking about other aspects of their identity, and things that are important to them, thinking about their faith and religion, thinking about culture and gender and ethnicity and sexuality, and remembering their strengths and their skills and their hopes and dreams for their future, so that we're not just focusing in a more problem focused way. However, it is helpful for us to kind of think about the potential for trauma, knowing what we do about the level of trauma that many young people having to leave their home country will have experienced. I think one of the tricky things about trauma is that it happens internally. It happens the way we think and store the memory. It happens in the way that then affects us and affects how we see the world and how we think about ourselves. But actually, as members of staff in a school or college, we can't see what's going on inside. So we're left trying to interpret and make sense of those external reactions. I mentioned just earlier about those kind of physical and bodily reactions, and they may not have made a link between how I'm doing physically and how I'm doing emotionally. One thing we really see is being on high alert. During a traumatic event, a young person may have that real overwhelming sense of fight, flight, freeze. And actually, after the event is over, with a traumatic event, often your body doesn't go back to reset, doesn't go back to its kind of normal state. And therefore, you're left on that state of high alert. And we think here about one of our characters, Khalil, and his teacher is wondering, does he have attention difficulties? Actually, he was really good at paying attention, but mostly at things that might be threatening. The way he's experienced the world so far is that the world outside, anything can happen. So actually his attention is focused on keeping himself safe rather than focused on the really interesting lesson that the teacher might be giving. So really thinking about what attention, when we think someone's got attention difficulties, actually, is it an attention difficulty, or is it just difficulty paying attention to the things we might want them to pay attention to in terms of engaging? We think about Amina here, whose intrusive memories are coming into her mind so much. Actually, even as a little girl, we're seeing this come out in her artwork, that we're seeing blobs of red, scribbles of black. And maybe that's a bit of a stereotype, but actually some children do really show us how they're feeling through their artwork. And then we're left wondering, is this a colour preference? Is this something she always does? Or is she trying to tell us and communicate to us something from her past and her memories? We might also see young people wanting to avoid anything that reminds them of their trauma. And because we may not know exactly what's happened to them, and we may not know the context and the situation and the details, we're left having to respond to someone who's suddenly become distressed or overwhelmed or cross and frustrated, or wanting to run away and hide in a corner because something has reminded them of the trauma that they've experienced. We might see them feeling highly anxious and panicking. We might see them struggling to engage because actually they're so worried about what's happening back with their family members back in their country of origin. We might see them really struggling with low mood and finding it really hard to kind of re-engage with life and finding things enjoyable and pleasurable. And then there might be that impact on their well-being, that we see things are happening, not just at school, but when we communicate with people around them, whether that's their foster carers, if they're come here separated or supported accommodation. We might chat with their social workers, or it might be that we're able to talk with their parents or caregivers and find out what's life like outside home, as well as how they're doing in school, and what are we finding out about their social life at an age appropriate kind of level. What are they able to engage with, and are we worried about any number of the things that I've mentioned there across their world? And then we're thinking about, well, how can we respond to that if actually we don't know the details? And schools aren't they're not therapists. People in schools, you might be a school counsellor, but actually largely we're education staff, we're pastoral staff and not therapists. So actually, what could we do to help children respond? And we hope in the toolkits to have given you some ideas of the ways in which your ordinary interactions can be really meaningful and powerful. We draw on some research by Stephen Hopful and colleagues that help us identify that after traumatic events, things that are really helpful for children and young people are for them to feel a sense of safety and a sense of calm, to feel connected to others, to have a sense of control and to feel hopeful. One of the things that really stood out for me from one of our visits, in fact, it was a visit to Nest, is a young person who said, I really like that my teachers actually see me and know me, they even know what bus I take. And that might feel so trivial, in the kind of scheme of everything that's going on in a young person's life, we might feel as an adult, how's that important? But that young person who shared that was really sharing about how I feel like I belong here because people actually know me. They even know what bus I take. And that obviously was such a striking thing for her, in feeling that she was seen and known. Or it might be that we're having to respond to a child who can't communicate to us how they're feeling. And we can see here Amina, they've set up a little pop-up tent and they're putting cushions and toys in it and giving her a safe place to go if she needs to kind of feel more settled. Just going to mention quickly about seeking specialist help. We know that trauma reactions are natural and understandable, and many of them will diminish over time, but sometimes they might not, and we might need to consider the impact and then take a really careful, thoughtful approach to how they're doing and the kind of impact on them, and work collaboratively to think about what might be needed in terms of next steps for them. And then throughout all of that, kind of keep the relationship going with them, rather than think, oh, their needs are too high, I need to move them on to somebody else. How can we still keep that central connection going? And then what about you? In the toolkits, we think about the culture of self-care that you're working in, and where we hope that that's there and paramount throughout your whole education setting, and where it isn't, what you can do about that, thinking about your limits and your well-being, and knowing what's normal for you, and also so that you can work out when your well-being is low. We also mentioned vicarious trauma, which is uncommon. I certainly don't want to give a message that, gosh, this happens all the time, but sometimes people can be significantly impacted in the longer term by being exposed to the trauma of someone else. So hearing the stories and finding out some of the details about trauma can leave you not just for a couple of days thinking about it, but over a period of weeks and even into months. And you might start to have some of those post-traumatic reactions similar to that of the child or young person has been experiencing. And we start to maybe see that that's having a significant impact on your well-being and day-to-day life. And I think when we're working with any children affected by trauma, it's worth us knowing about that. And in fact, the research says that being aware of our well-being and being aware of what's happening to us is a really good protective factor. So I'd certainly urge you, if you think that's something, have a look in the toolkit to find a little bit more about it. And there are some ideas there about seeking support. But I want to end actually with thinking about vicarious resilience, which is that personal growth we might get from working with others that are affected by trauma. And I really like how this is described in the research, how the way stories might inspire us. Yes, they might be painful and difficult, but actually we might be inspired by the resilience and the resourcefulness of young people. We might witness their adaptability to move across the world under the most difficult of circumstances. And actually that might make us think about our own approach to problem solving and managing, and seeing the hopefulness might positively impact on our own perspective of life. So really, as well as thinking about the potential for negative impact, also remembering this is why we do it, isn't it? About making a difference to children and young people, and actually in spite of and because of the difficulties that they're going through, still being able to hold on to their stories of resilience and things that are carrying them through. And I just want to let you know, just before we speak, we hear from our expert by experience, we've got a webinar on the 4th of December, another free webinar around childhood trauma, war and conflict, where we'll be particularly thinking about the impact on mental health for children who are directly affected by war. We'll be thinking about how we can support parents where they're in an area of conflict to best nurture and support children, as well as thinking about in the UK, if we've got children affected by what's going on in other countries, how can we talk to them about war? And then we'll be thinking about recovery in the longer term. And now I'm going to hand over to hear from our experts by experience. And we're going to start with a conversation with Luwam. Luwam is a young ambassador from Kent Refugee Action Network, who I got to meet with and work with. And we got to know her as part of our resources. She works as a young ambassador. She's also at university studying occupational therapy, which meant she couldn't be here live. So we recorded our conversation. We're going to share it with you. And then fingers crossed, Luwam gets to her screen to join us for the Q&A later. So I'm going to come off my video and hand over to Luwam. Thank you. Luwam, thank you for agreeing to speak with me today. Really good to have this conversation, and we've got to know each other a little bit because I've been out to work with the young ambassadors at Kent Refugee Action Network a number of times as part of our work here. And thank you for agreeing for this conversation, really thinking about how we can help schools and colleges best support and understand the needs of young people who've had to seek asylum in the UK. So I wonder, can we start with maybe thinking about when you first arrived in the UK, and what was it like when you came to school? Were there any particular differences that stood out for you?
Great, thank you for having me. So when I came to the UK, I went to school. I was excited because I've not been in school for a long time, and since I left my country, and so I was excited and full of hope that I get the chance to get back to education. But once I got there, it was different, and the culture, the language, and the environment was different for me. That is something that, especially the environment, is something that I feel like it was very different for me. Because break time, I thought like you can go free, like to go to the shop or enjoy with your friends outside the school, but in the UK it's different. You still have to be within the school, and so that was different. And also the language, is obviously English is my second language, so I only know few like yes and no, so it was hard for me to cope with that because I was full of people who can speak English, really good English, some of them first language and other second language, but they've been here long. So that was something that I feel really new for me. I was scared, and sometimes I feel like I'm misunderstood because I can't really express myself much, because of the lack of the language.
Thank you, that's really helpful, and that's really, really interesting for us. Those of us who've spent lots of time in schools, we just take it for granted that the school is a safe environment, and once you're in for the day, that's where you are. Whereas you're saying you were used to being able to come and go from the school building at break times and lunch times, whereas this time it must have felt quite a different thing. And then I wonder whether you can think about a time maybe when something was very unfamiliar and new to you, and how you handled that and how it made you feel, maybe even how the teacher or the adult handled that that with you as well.
I think I could give so many examples, but one example that stood out for me still is one of my teachers asked us to log in computer, get ready, and then she said she will get back to us after 5 and 10 minutes, and everyone logged in apart from me, and they was pressing from there to there, different browsers, but I couldn't even log into computer. I looked stupid. I was just looking around, and then I couldn't log in the computer. And anyway, the teacher come back, and then she was so furious, like, we haven't logged in till now, like, give you chance, to log in, get ready yourself. And I could not say that I cannot log in the computer in front of the students, so I had to ask the teacher if I could speak to her outside, and she kindly said okay. We went outside, and I said to her, I can't log in the computer. And then like she really wanted to cry. She said, why didn't tell me that I could have helped you, like for the, before when we start the lessons, you wouldn't have to wait for the 10-minute time. But I just said to her, I don't know, I feel so ashamed, like not knowing how to log in the computer. But I think she was very, how she approached with that was great for me, because she didn't judge me. She just said to me, like, maybe this is not something that you grow up with, and then she said, I would be happy to support you, even giving me one-to-one lessons just to get familiar with myself, how to use the computer. So that was something that I feel, it was embarrassing, but at the same time, it was a time for me that to find support, the right support that I would need to help me to have access to computers.
Yeah, thank you. Gosh, that story is really powerful, isn't it? Imagining you not knowing how to log in. It's just something you've never come across before. And I know you talked about feeling embarrassed and even ashamed that you didn't know, but I'm really glad you got a response from that teacher where they were able to say, that's okay, I'm going to show you and I'm going to support you with that. And I think for us in schools, us being really aware of not taking for granted what we imagine young people are used to and comfortable with, and also really and for us to stop and think about what it might be like if there's something that everyone else can do and you're not sure about yet.
Definitely,
So
yeah.
we kind of respond in ways that are thoughtful and kind around that you might be embarrassed potentially. And then I wonder, are there any things that you could tell us that, you know, teachers did? I know you spent a little bit of time at school and then at college as well, and now you're at university, of course.
Yeah.
What are the things that stand out for you that adults in schools and colleges did or have done that have been helpful to kind of help you settle and feel comfortable in a UK environment?
I think I could give many examples again, but I feel like having the one-to-one support, language support, was something that really helped me. When I was at school, after school, I used to attend to one-to-one lessons just with English language. That helps me to catch up and to understand what's around me and to make friends. That was a key for me, like to open the door really. And then I feel comfortable because at the beginning I was just going to school, come back, like really I don't really understand. And then there was days that I didn't really want to go to school because I don't feel like there was a point, because I don't understand, people don't understand me, and I don't feel like I don't feel like I fit in the group. But when I had the that support, it helps me to understand the language more, and then to express myself, to say what kind of support that I would be benefit from where I was at school. And then moving on to college, I had ESOL support, so it's English as second language. We had a group of people. I think that was really, really helpful for me because I don't feel like just myself, like there was a lot of people from different countries where we can learn English language for 1 year, and that was really helpful. And then after that I start course, health and social care course, and alongside that I used to attend for ESOL support lessons on my own time. And so there was a support where you could attend if you're English as a second language, any, like if you do courses or if you're just doing ESOLs, that just help you to speed up, you know, with the level of your English. And yeah, that was really helpful for me. I think having that support helps me to be where I am. I wouldn't be able to be where I am without having that support. Just attending the class is not enough, because yeah, it's being a second language, not understand the culture, the language, the system is so complicated. But having that support, yeah, it was really helpful.
That sounds really helpful. And you know, for me, I'm listening, it wasn't just learning English enabled you to access the lessons and the curriculum, it enabled you to fit in and feel that you belonged more and feel more comfortable in the kind of friendship group, and that helped you feel motivated to keep going even though it was really hard. So that's really helpful. Are there any other aspects of the way people have treated you, the kind of supported you with other aspects of your kind of whole school experience or college experience?
I think the encouragement, like seeing that something that I could do, especially when I start the course, I was really nervous. I didn't feel like I could do it because English is my second language when it comes to assignment works. But my teacher encouraged me, I can do it, and they can see that it's the language, but I have the potential. I want to learn. I want to, you know, I was eager to learn more things. I want to do my courses, attend classes. Even I used to get awards certificate for like getting my attendance was great. So they used to every term I used to get like for my engagement with educations, and the support that I asked was great. So there was really like, because you engage, you could do it, you know, because you know what you want to do. And that was really something that I feel like it did help me, because they're aware that I want to learn, you know, I want to grow, but at the same time I have to face a lot of challenges, and the language, the culture. I wouldn't be able to, I feel like sometimes it takes me twice as much for someone who's been here to do assignment. If it takes them 2 hours, I probably need a minimum of 4 hours to do assignment work. Just to give an example, about 4 hours, not enough, and it could be 10 hours. It depends what the assignment topic is. So it's putting that much time. You have to invest so much, but recognizing that we're doing as second language, people from asylum and refugee background, they have to do so much work, and to be with someone who's been here for long, who born here, and have to work twice as much, sometimes triple, and yeah, to get where they want to be. Yeah, but it's how I feel, and knowing that, I think it does help a lot from the teacher perspective. They know that we work hard.
That's brilliant. So that's for us to in schools thinking about time and how much extra time it might take someone who's having to also learn English as well as learn how to complete assignments in the kind of UK way. And then there was something really important there about encouragement as well, helping you believe you could do it, which kind of really helps you along the way. And I don't know whether I heard that there was something around encouraging you even when your English maybe wasn't quite, you were still learning English, but they were still encouraging you that you'll be okay and you'll be able to do this course.
Yeah,
which is really helpful. And then I guess to kind of finish, I wonder whether you could help us think about, from your experience, particularly, but I know you work with lots of other young people who've sought asylum in the UK and come here for their education now. I wonder whether you can help us think about, are there other things you think it would be helpful for teachers and adults in schools to know?
Yeah, I think for me is what I wish, although I had the support that I feel I need at the time, but there were a lot of things that they could consider as well. But even myself, I was not aware of it. For example, mental health is something is not about, in my culture, it's not something that people take it seriously, and I don't think so. I see back home people talk about mental health as such. When I come to this country, obviously I have experienced so much to get to the UK, and so I didn't know what I was going through my head. But if I had someone to talk to me, maybe not just mention about mental health, because culturally it's like someone mental health, you're getting crazy. It's not acceptable. The way I grow up, it would make me really upset if someone said that, are you struggling with your mental health? Now I'm okay because I've been here long, and then the subject that the course that I do at school as well as at university is relevant. There's so many things that is related to mental health, so I'm aware of it, although I don't know, I can't say I know much about mental health, but I'm aware of how it can impact, what is stress, what's depression, and what could I do for myself to help myself when I feel stressed, or if I feel low, if I can't get out from the house, what action do I need to take, or do I need to talk to people, or do I need to do something that I like? I think yeah, I feel like the teachers, they probably wouldn't know what's happening to me, and I don't know what was happening to me as well. But knowing that different cultures from different countries, sometimes they don't know mental health, they may not know it, but they feel embarrassed talking about it. So having that awareness, I think it does help for people to get the support that they need. Maybe it's not one-to-one therapy, because that doesn't suit for everyone, but maybe having sports, playing sport after school, or doing something they like, or talking about, I don't know, everyone's different, so there's different therapy technique that they can use, but being aware of it does really, really help. I think I wouldn't say I was not struggling with my mental health. I was definitely struggling with my mental health, but I didn't know I was not aware of it. And then I have suffered a lot from it. But eventually I did get support after years and years of being in the UK.
Thank you, Luwam. So it's really important for us to appreciate that even though a young person might be struggling with their mental health, that might not be a term that they're used to or familiar with, or it may have quite a different understanding in their kind of cultural framework from back in their home country, but to think about ways of which gently to ask someone how they're doing, and maybe not jump straight in with talking about mental health using that terminology, and then to think about the broad ways in which young people can be supported, which might include being referred for therapy, but might include doing sports and keeping busy and doing other things that kind of support their well-being more generally. That's really helpful.
Thank you. So the other things I would like to add is, in terms of like the knowing the difference between language and the language and knowledge. So I may be limited with the language, but I may be okay with the knowledge. For example, knowing how to do maths calculation. I may have different ways to do the calculation because that's how I learn back home. They do it differently, and sometimes it's similar. So I think sometimes like know of the teacher, but sometimes people see you if you can't speak, and then you don't know what you're doing. And especially I would say, like, from my experience, especially maths is something that I used to love back home. So I was okay, I understand, but when I do the calculations, because I can't express myself and stuff, so there was a lot of challenges I have to face as well, because of my maths. Yeah, my maths was great, but if I can't explain it, or if I cannot answer it in English word, that was something I think being recognized that people what can do, how they learn, they learn back home, and then the different knowing from knowledge and language is something that I find really interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good take home for people listening to this, watching our conversation, the difference between language and knowledge, and that maybe when somebody's language isn't as advanced in English, that doesn't mean they don't have the knowledge. And for schools to really be creative and think about how can we help someone excel in a subject they're good at, without such a barrier of knowing, maybe still being learning their English. That's really helpful. Thank you, Luwam. Really enjoyed our conversation today. Thank you for sharing with such honesty and helping us really understand some of the issues young people might face when they first come to school in the UK. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Thank you. So firstly, I'd really like to thank Beck for your enlightening presentation. And just to say, the new UK Trauma Council resources are brilliant. I think they're very needed, especially now, more so than ever, potentially. And they're also a real demonstration of meaningful co-production. So thank you for sharing. And I hope that the attendees will get a chance to have a look at those, and they'll hopefully be useful for you in your education communities. And I'd also like to thank you for sharing your conversation with Luwam. I found it really inspiring to hear from Luwam, and I'm sure we can agree that it took a lot of courage for her to talk so openly and honestly about such a life-changing experience. So Beck, we will bring you back later for the Q&A, and we're hoping that Luwam will be able to join us too. I know she's trying to join after university today. So we will move on to our next speaker now, who I'm really pleased to introduce. So our next speaker is Beth Hilditch. Beth is a psychotherapist who has worked in education for over 20 years, first as a teacher, then as an advisory teacher and achievement and equality consultant for Nottinghamshire County Council. There she advised and trained schools and teachers across all stages in areas such as English as an additional language, Black and minority ethnic achievement, anti-racism and refugee and asylum seeker education. Since then, she pursued her interest in the mental health of children and young people and trained to become a psychotherapist. In 2018, she combined her two passions of teaching and psychotherapy to be part of a team that established Nottingham Education Sanctuary Team, also known as NEST, which is part of the Hospital and Home Education Learning Centre. NEST is a unique education provision for 15 to 19-year-old refugee and sanctuary seekers in Nottingham, where she continues to work part-time. Beth has her own private psychotherapy practice, as well as being part of HEART, the Holistic Education for Asylum Seekers and Refugees team. They offer specialist support and training for those working with refugees and young people seeking sanctuary. We're really pleased to have you this evening, Beth, so I will pass over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll see if I can share my screen. Okay. So I know we're running a little bit over, so I'll try and speed through. So thank you for that welcome, Natalie. Yes, so my name's Beth, and until reasonably recently, I was a teacher, but I have worked with refugees and young asylum seeking children for a number of years, and now I am a psychotherapist in my role. So I want to kind of link to a lot of what's already been said, really, and it was really lovely to hear from Beck and Luwam, and it links so much with our experiences at Nest as well. I've started with this quote, and this was from one of our first Nest students talking about his experience of Nest. So I'll come back to that later in the presentation, but yeah, I wanted to think about some of the things that Beck mentioned about when we think of a refugee, we think of a traumatic event, or often traumatic episodes that have happened to them and the reasons why they've had to flee their country, and often may have experienced other events on their journey, but I think sometimes we miss the things that once they've actually arrived in the UK, some of the additional challenges that they might face, which actually Luwam mentioned a few of. So I think it's really important for us to think about, as well as the reasons why they've had to flee their country, but also thinking about some of the ongoing challenges that they can also face and how we can support them. So I think one of the most familiar things, and Luwam again spoke about this, is the language. Often they might arrive even having learnt English in their home country with very little English or no English, and this can be a really frightening and disempowering experience for them, not just in school, but also just basic things like going to the shops, getting on the bus. One of the students I've worked with actually said they didn't leave their foster carer's house for a number of months because they were terrified of getting lost and not being able to ask the way back. And then obviously the fact that they can't communicate their needs, and also the skills that they bring as well. Again, Luwam spoke a little bit about that, how she was really frustrated that she couldn't actually show how good she was at some of the subjects that she knew from back home. And this can also lead to feelings of isolation, because how do you go out and start to make friends in school or in the community, and you've come to a brand new country, new city where you probably don't know anyone, can lead to real feelings of isolation, and especially if they don't get into education straight away, this can mean that then they will might sit in their room sort of ruminating on everything that's happened, and again that can have a real impact on their mental health. Culture was mentioned, and culture is a really important thing, kind of often caught between two cultures, the culture that they've left behind, but the new host culture, and how do they sort of assimilate into that. Culture is a way of, it's sort of a meaning making part of our identity. A lot of the traditions and things that we do. So it's important, I think, to learn a little bit about their culture, but also for them to learn for you to introduce some of the sort of the things that we do, and I think actually in the UK in schools we're really quite good at doing that. Discrimination, yeah, they can often face discrimination. It might have been the reason why one of the reasons they had to flee their own country. Obviously, there's a lot of different messages and stories out there, and that can really mean it's very difficult to gain that sense of belonging and feeling part of the community, and many unfortunately will experience things like racism. Deprivation is something that often affects the families and students that we work with. For example, if someone is seeking asylum, they're not allowed to work, and will be living off maybe it's around, I think, £45 to £47 a week for buying their basic necessities, so their toiletries, their food, their clothes, and then even if they become a refugee, and that will involve having to try and find work and signing up for different sorts of benefits, and all of this can be really challenging if they've got limited English. So, and often refugee populations may become homeless. Some may be going through the legal process if they are seeking asylum, and obviously there's a lot of sort of information about that around at the moment, and And this can be a really difficult time, and as we all know, there's quite a backlog at the moment in the Home Office system, and so this process can take 1 to 2 years at the moment. All of that time they're in this limbic state where they don't really know what their future is going to be. They're fearful of being sent back, and it can also, the actual process can involve multiple solicitors interviews where they're asked to relive the trauma and the reasons why they've had to leave. And this can exacerbate a feeling of being stateless and also statusless. A lot of them struggle to get ID for quite a long time, and even then it might be incorrect. And this can mean there's problems getting bank accounts because they don't have the right paperwork. And so all of that can feel like they don't exist, like they don't belong. They're not really part of being here. Luwam spoke about the fact that she sort of had missed bits of her education. Some students may not have even had a sort of formal schooling. Often some of our Afghan students who've grown up in some of the more remote mountain villages may not have had the chance to have a formal education, or their education experience may be very different, and often it may be quite disrupted, so they may have been out of school for a time. So it's helping them to understand how school is in the UK. And again, finding those opportunities to recognise their skills that they bring. Often they will have suffered bereavements, so some may even have witnessed the deaths of family members and friends, but also a grief for the places that they've left behind. They may often have had to flee at very short notice. And something that I think surprised me initially was when if they are seeking asylum and they get their leave to remain, how it should be sort of quite a happy time, but actually it's when they realise all of the things that they've left behind, and that can involve a real grieving process as well. And all of that can exacerbate the trauma that they've already experienced. A lot of times people sort of talk about trauma in a sort of the context of the past, but I think a lot of times all of the things that they're experiencing here can contribute to an ongoing trauma that we're often not aware of. And Beck spoke a little bit about some of the signs and symptoms, things like sleeplessness, flashbacks, struggling to concentrate, outbursts of anger. And I know the resource is going to be really helpful for you to kind of pick up on some of those things that you might notice, and to look at the reasons behind that behaviour, and then think about how you react to that. And again, as well, I think there's support about how to know when you might need to refer on. But I want to move on to talking a little bit about what you can do as someone who works with young people in a school. And as Beck said, it's not about doing lots of additional things. We know that teachers and everyone working in schools don't have time to do that. But it might be that there's already an awful lot that you're doing that you don't even realise. Something that we've found, so when we formed Nest, and we worked with Professor Joanna McIntyre at the University of Nottingham, who's a specialist in refugee education, and she was we explored the model of around safety, belonging, and succeeding. And these were the sort of the key principles that we built Nest on. And just to point out that we've got some quotes here, and these are from some of the students at Nest. When we first started it in the early days, I did some interviews with the staff and students about what they felt worked at Nest and what we could learn from that. So I've included some of the quotes here because hopefully then I've got some of their real life experience and voices coming through. But one of the things that we feel is really important is to be that safe base. They'll often have multiple people working with them, solicitors, social workers, maybe CAMs, and some of those can often change quite a lot, but you can be that that sort of continuity and that safe base. And it's also important to kind of be that link to all the other places. I'm often, and a lot of the staff are often speaking to all multiple agencies, even the charities, and to get that whole picture of the young person, because as Beck said, they don't come with a nice big file all about them. It's really important to have that communication so you can find out what is going on when they're not at school. And I think it's helpful to think of education with mental health. You may not be a mental health practitioner. And actually, as Luwam said, sort of culturally for a lot of them, mental health and sort of all things like psychotherapy is a really alien concept to them. And they can often be quite fearful of it, and often are not so keen to access the support. But there's a lot of research coming out now to suggest that actually they are more likely to access sort of mental health support within a safe space like their education provision. So it's about making that safe space by building trusting relationships, seeing those students. I make a point, and a lot of the teachers make a point of seeing and saying good morning to every single student that comes in, even if I don't know them very well, and I go down at the end of the day and I say goodbye to them. I think that's really important. They've often felt completely unimportant and unseen in the world, and so to make them feel like someone has noticed them, as the quote says here, it really grounds them and can really help their start to the day. And it might not be, you can do that maybe as a class teacher, but also having that key person. Maybe if in a big secondary school, that's really difficult for every staff member to do it, but making sure everyone's aware of them, yeah, maybe having a key person that they can talk to. I kind of liken it to having a plant which you've pulled out and then try to replant somewhere else. And it's about not just about the plant, it's about the environment and all the nutrients that are in the soil and the water and the sunshine. And it's kind of up to the school to provide that nurturing environment. And one of the ways you can create that environment is by making connections. So I think we know this already. It's not just about education for people working in schools. It's about building relationships, and by having those relationships, it can create that sense of belonging. Although they may not have much English and they might not be able to show all their skills, finding those opportunities where they can participate and feel like they belong and are included. And one of the things we do at Nest is we as well as feeling as a school community, we get out into our local community. We have lots of links with the local libraries, museums, art galleries, and do a lot of and sports groups. We do a lot of links with them because it's about them starting to understand the wider community and where they fit within that as well. And making connection through empathy. So I think Beck spoke about having that time, so listening to them. It's not about asking them about their experience. I always feel that if they want to share something with you, they'll let you know, and being there when they do and really listening. It can feel a little bit disempowering. I think sometimes some teachers have said, you know, what can I do? I feel completely powerless. I can't solve everything for them. What difference can I make? But don't underestimate it. One of the students describes it as when it's like a rock. And he said when he spoke about things, it was like a rock lifting off his chest so he could breathe a little bit more. And so, yeah, listening is so important. So you can be, going back to the safety, we can be that island in the middle of all the chaos, all the things that they've got going on. By providing that calm environment and feeling that connection, they can really start to kind of feel grounded, because they can't think about what's happened. They sort of, it's sort of a need to remember, but they also wish to forget at the same time, and they can't begin to explore that until they feel grounded in the present. So that's about, and when we talk about some of their feelings and reactions, and we talked about some of the traumatic reactions that they might have, I kind of try to get them to see that they often think, oh, there's something wrong with me. And it's about talking about, well, it's not about something being wrong with you. You're having an ordinary reaction to an extraordinary experience. And what a lot of them want is what Ravi Kohli refers to as the resumption of an ordinary life. They're craving just that kind of day-to-day ordinariness. So you can create that by having routines and keeping things where they know what's happening so that they can feel regulated, but also making sure that you have some fun. At Easter time one time, my background originally was primary school teaching, so I got these little clues and I'd hidden little plastic Easter eggs around the school, and I thought, oh, are these 16, 17-year-olds going to think I'm just like, what is this? But actually it was such fun seeing them tearing around school, laughing their heads off. A lot of them will have missed out on some of their sort of childhood being a kid experiences. So having a bit of fun, sharing a bit of yourself, feeling like, you know, they see you as human. So that sense of empowerment, a lot of them will have felt disempowered and unseen. So giving them a voice, pupil voice is really important at NES. We allow them where possible we often ask them feedback on all the activities we do. We will always try and listen when they've got an opinion on something. We can't always promise to change what they want us to change, but they know that they feel heard, and that gives them that sense of freedom, and that NES belongs to them. It's not us teachers telling them what to do all the time, and creates a feeling of respect and also equality as well. They're not seeing us up here and telling them what to do. So as Beck said, you know, a lot of them have got themselves, they've experienced unimaginable things that thankfully a lot of us will never get to experience in our lives, and they've got themselves halfway around the world to be here. So I sort of almost think, who am I to tell them how to live their life and what to do? So giving them that sense of control where possible. I know that can be difficult sometimes in schools, but those opportunities where we can is important. And finally, and I think most importantly, I was thinking about inspiring hope, and I was thinking these are, at times, it's some of the most challenging work I've ever done. It can be very difficult, but actually it's the most rewarding work I've ever done. These students really inspire hope in me, to see the adversity they've faced and how they have changed and grown from that, like a sort of blossoming plant. I had a student who talked about, his friends used to say to him, oh, you know, you could write a film about your life. It's so unbelievable. And he just had this real attitude to life that he'd been at the lowest of the low, and so he didn't have a feel of failure. And he told me about going ice skating, and he just said, I just went straight into the middle, and he didn't care if he was going to fall over, and he just got that real thirst for life and just to throw himself into it. And I felt really inspired by that. But I think also our job as teachers is to support that resilience and also inspire them. And that takes me back to the quote at the beginning and that was about a teacher who had talked to the student and talked to him about becoming a social worker, and the student thought, well, I can never do that. And he started to believe in himself. And I think that's the most important thing, is to allow them to believe in themselves and they can see that they can be a something and they can succeed. And we've got students who've gone on to university or who've got their own businesses and doing amazing things. And again, it's seeing that positive side to things. So I'm going to end there, so we've got plenty of time for the Q&A, but thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all of that with us, Beth. Yeah, it was really lovely to hear your breadth of knowledge and experiences, lots of valuable content, and definitely lots of practical takeaways from your presentation as well. I feel like there's many things that you spoke about from people's lived experience and also from your experience that we can reflect on when working with young people. So thank you very much. We're now going to move on to our Q&A section. So yeah, I'm really excited to be able to welcome back Beck as well. And I'm not sure, I think Luwam maybe can't join us, or hasn't been able to join us yet, but we will see if she is able to. I know she was at university, but it will be great to talk to both of you, and we can kick off with some questions. Thank you to the audience for submitting your questions also. We will try and get round to as many as we can before 6 o'clock when we need to close. So I think the first question that I'll kick off with is, what are the key signs that a student might be struggling with the effects of trauma? I don't know, that's up to either of you, Beth or Beck.
Do you want me to come in first with my kind of clinical hat, Beth, and then Beth, you follow up with kind of, so I guess it is difficult, as I was saying, there's so much of what happens with trauma happens internally, but we're left trying to observe on the outside. But I would look for any of those things that we've put in the toolkit around being on high alert, struggling to settle, being extra jumpy, finding it difficult to focus on the thing we're wanting them to focus on because they're so busy trying to keep safe. I might be finding out very gently, not as they walk through the door, but finding out, are we hearing anything about their trauma in their work or their conversation, or if they're younger, in their play or in their artwork? Is there anything that's suggesting this is someone who's quite distressed? Because trauma is overwhelming and distressed. Might be thinking about, are we seeing them worried or anxious? So kind of any of those things that, and again, not jumping that this must be a trauma reaction straight away, but kind of being curious about it and observing, building that relationship so that over time we can start to unpick and maybe talk with them a little bit more about that at a pace they're comfortable to go with, really. And they'd be my first thoughts. Beth, would you add anything from
Yeah, I think that's really important about knowing your students. I think something I notice and that the NEST teachers are particularly good at are just picking up on those signs of change. So it might be, for example, when things might be happening in their home country. I know a lot of ours pick a lot of stuff up from social media, and it might be that the teacher notices what might seem really they might dismiss it and think it's a minor thing, and then they'll often maybe message me or talk to one of the other teachers and say, oh, I noticed this about so and so. And then sometimes by having those conversations with maybe other staff members, you kind of think, oh, that's a bit unusual, maybe we should kind of see if they would like a bit of a chat about that, and often that can really then start that conversation.
Definitely. I just add one, sorry Natalie, I'm just going to add one thing about something we know from the research around trauma is lots of reactions are normal reactions to extraordinary events, as Beth described it so beautifully. And lots of those things naturally decrease over time. From some of the research, we can see that if a young person gets to more than a month since the event and they're still having some of those difficulties, again, let's kind of be thinking about, if they get to 6 months, the research shows that the difficulties, if they haven't already started to decrease, they may not decrease on their own. And of course, we may have young people that have been on journeys and been through many, many places. So that's quite likely that their traumatic events happened more than 6 months ago. But again, let's not jump in and frighten young people starting to talk about, and let's build that relationship. There's lots in the toolkits about having those conversations and what you might look for. Sorry, Natalie.
You both. No, excellent answers. Thank you both. The next question I'm going to ask is, are there any tips? So someone asked if there's any tips around how to get schools to see trauma as not simply poor behaviour, so the trauma response, and how that might manifest in young people. I don't know.
I'm happy to, Beth, or would you rather? It is difficult, and part of it's a kind of a culture of thinking curiously about and seeing behaviour as a way of communicating something. So as a whole staff team thinking about what any young person or child is showing us in the way that they respond and react, and thinking, what do I know about what's happened that might explain why they're responding in this way? And even when I don't know exactly what's happened, can I see that a young person is becoming more overwhelmed than I'm expecting? The response is bigger than what I might expect them to be, that I'm seeing them triggered by noises and sounds, or peer conflict has a much bigger reaction to them because it reminds them of conflict that they've witnessed. So really around thinking, trying to encourage, and schools are brilliant. I was at a school last week and they were doing just that, thinking about what does this mean for this young person, then why are they responding like that? So if we can get that conversation going rather than what's the problem, and why they behaving like that.
Thank you. Thanks, Beck. Beth, I don't know if you had any more that you wanted to add.
No, I think it's something that schools are definitely more open to now, and seeing as sort of what's behind the behavior. I definitely, I've been in education for over 20 years, and that's definitely something that is much more in the conversation now. But again, it's about knowing those children and what their background is. And again, as Beck said, that can be more difficult because a lot of our students, we don't know much about them. But even things like finding out, I was thinking back to the first question about as well, knowing what's going on in different places and what kind of events, because I know our students very much react. For example, last year when there was the earthquake, and we had to just monitor, how some of our students might be feeling about that, and maybe openly having those conversations, because they might be having those conversations behind. I've gone a bit off topic there, but yeah, that kind of thing, introducing those conversations.
No, that makes sense. Thank you. Another question is, how do you respond to schools who think that people should move on from their experience and their status as a refugee? Yeah, I guess that's kind of similar in terms of interpreted more as a kind of behavioral response. But yeah, any tips around moving on?
I guess I'm kind of thinking that some traumatic events like that will be hugely, a core part of someone's growing up experience. We hope it doesn't always define them, that it doesn't become their unique identifying, but that might mean that there's going to be time and support and help so that they start to fill their life with other things and not see. But that question kind of is related to other areas of childhood trauma, and that you can't move on from something if actually your body is still responding as if it's happening again. So us being thoughtful and patient with that, and again having those conversations with people that know the child well as with people who understand a bit about trauma, so that we can kind of make sense of that a little bit.
Thank you, Beck. Beth?
And I think that's why I sort of wanted to start with what I did, because I think sometimes we think, oh, they're in the UK, they're, especially if they've got, leave to remain, oh, they should be happy. And as I said, I was initially quite shocked when I first started working with students who then would do things like get their leave to remain and then start this huge grieving process because they felt safe. They felt safe enough to then begin to explore all the trauma that had happened to them. A lot of our students are so caught up in the process that they're going through when they get here to know whether or not they're going to be able to stay and feel safe, that they can't begin to reflect on their trauma. And then when they get to the point where they can, which often can be long years after the event, I think it's bearing that in mind, and not to forget all the other things that are going on. And just because they feel maybe safe here in the UK doesn't suddenly make everything else go away.
Absolutely. Thank you both. Another question is around colleges, and I don't know if there's maybe a different approach for sort of older adolescents, or whether it's a sort of similar or kind of young adults, but someone has said, I've got colleges regularly asking for classroom strategies around how to support progress in English as a second, ESOL. Any ideas, please? I'm not sure if this really relates specifically to the trauma, but yeah, around the kind of English as a second language.
I know that the Bell Foundation have got some brilliant resources around supporting language development for English of speakers of other languages. So I definitely have a look there to see what they've got about language particularly. Beth, I don't know if you've got some other resources on the tip of your tongue.
The Bell Foundation is the key one sort of to go to. I think I'm kind of wasn't quite sure whether the students are in ESOL classes now, or what the question was referring to. But yeah, I think hopefully, I think it is something that we haven't sort of looked into as much at college age. But yeah, Bell Foundation is a key one, definitely, for the language side of things, and maybe trying to connect. I think it would be helpful for people to sort of connect to other colleges. I mean, we're a college and we are a specialist college for 15 to 19-year-olds. So, you know, if people do want to connect with Nest, then they're very welcome to, and we can sort of share information and tips.
Thank you, Beth. That's kind. Yeah, I think we can follow up after the webinar with the details and information if people would like to get in touch. And so another question is, other than CAMS, where can children of primary age be referred, and who may need further support due to their experience of trauma?
There's a big section about thinking about who might need extra support in the education toolkit. I don't pretend that we've answered every possible question that everyone has, but hopefully it takes you through in a thoughtful way about when to be more worried and what maybe to do about that. That question about where else can we go, that is tricky. There aren't enough services. I would look locally. I would find out, have you got some community organisations with expertise in supporting children and young people, because sometimes they have a therapy arm or a counsellor. I'd look to kind of our kind of services that work in primary schools, Place to Be, and counsellors that are based there, for example, if you have Place to Be or something similar, because lots of them will have experience in supporting trauma, maybe newer to working with children with experience of refugee backgrounds, but maybe not. So but yes, I hope that in the coming years we see growth in therapeutic services for children who've experienced trauma through having to leave their home country.
Yeah, I think as you said, some of the charity sector, we've got our local charity, Nottingham Refugee Forum, but also places like Care for Calais, and they might often be involved if it's families and things like that. I've experienced that in primary schools sometimes, but yeah, there are unfortunately limited options, but as Beck says, not everyone will need necessarily a referral.
Yeah, and that actually brings me on to a similar question, well, a question that's linked, is it kind of at what point would both of you say is the point to start thinking about referring on to specialist services? When is it sort of beyond what the school maybe could do?
And I guess that's going to differ in a way, because different schools have got backgrounds in supporting mental health difficulties, and you might have your mental health lead and you may have part of a mental health support team that come in, and you may already have some skill in that. So the kind of that benchmark probably moves according to the background expertise of staff and kind of services you can log into, can I connect with. We've got that kind of flow chart that talks you through, and there is an opportunity to, if you feel confident to, comfortable with, use a measure that would kind of help you screen a little bit for kind of levels of trauma a young person's experiencing, if you feel comfortable and that's something you're used to doing, and we talk you through how you can do that, so that it might help you work out actually that is quite a lot. But again, I wouldn't be jumping in. I'd be making the relationship, giving the child time to settle, doing all those things that Beth talked about, to seeing how well they adapt anyway before we go jumping in with screening them for trauma and something that might feel very unfamiliar and very unsettling.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think don't underestimate the power that you sort of in the what you can do as an education professional in whatever role by just forming that relationship. You know, we didn't start our counselling provision at Nest straight away, but I felt that all the teachers worked really therapeutically with the student. They're almost students. There wasn't almost a need for. My students still don't know that it's counselling, really. We don't refer to it as counselling. We call it space to talk, because that's really what it is to them. And we have a very open conversation around mental health. We regularly talk about feelings and how things feel in your body as well. And it's kind of, and I think schools are getting a lot better at having that kind of open dialogue, as Luwam mentioned, about around mental health and getting them to recognise.
Thank you.
Can I just, sorry, Natalie, I know we've got loads more questions that come in at the end. What I didn't mention is that we've got a resource, self-help resource for young people that's part of the young people's resources there. And certainly if you've got a child of secondary age or above, that might be something you could do in a supportive conversation with them. Have a look. I took that resource out to several groups of young people from British Red Cross groups. and I hadn't expected, but they were going through those trauma reactions and ticking them off for themselves. And because there are copies in other language translations, not every language, but some of the key languages that we from our research were found to be useful, they were able to identify. And that was a really good tool to empower them to say, look, this is what I'm experiencing. I haven't been able to understand or articulate those needs before, but that might be something we can do with some older students, although we'd need a different approach really with younger ones.
Excellent, thank you. Is that in the latest portfolio, Beck, or is that?
Yeah, that's in the young people's resource. If you go to the page for young people,
brilliant,
on the childhood trauma.
Got two more questions and then I think we'll wrap up. So the first one, I thought this was a really interesting question. Someone asked, how do we deal with their guilt? As mentioned, they're safe in the UK, but they may have left friends and family in an unimaginable difficulty and they may feel guilty about them being safe. Do you have any tips?
Beth, I keep jumping in first. Do you want to?
No, that's fine.
That's fine. Yeah. Okay. I think it's a really natural response, actually. That kind of survivor's guilt after trauma is something we see quite a lot. It's natural, but it might not always be helpful, you know, in terms of carrying that. So much what happens when you've experienced traumatic events is out of your control. And therefore, whilst you might feel guilty, actually, there's probably nothing you did to make things better or worse for someone else. So being able to kind of help them articulate how they're feeling and then think with them about, actually, you know, this happened and it wasn't, you didn't choose it to happen to them and not to happen to you any more than you chose that you've been able to reach a place of relative safety and maybe they haven't. But I think it's just sitting alongside someone who's experiencing that guilt rather than us trying to kind of say, well, no, you don't need to, that's not really, you know, actually it's quite understandable and normal.
And I think that's, like I said earlier, it can be a really, I know some of the teachers that I've worked with and I myself have found it really difficult because we used to kind of, right, I'll sort that out for them. And you can't. And it can feel really disempowering. You think, oh, goodness. But as Beck said, it's that being alongside them and knowing that you're there, you're listening to them, you're feeling what they're feeling. You know, I have sat with students and literally they've just needed to have a really big cry for a really long time. And then they'll get up and take a breath and get on with things, but they just needed a safe place and a safe person to do that with. And I think that can be really important because you can't change it. You can't change it for them, but being alongside them and knowing that you're there for them, I think is so important.
Thank you both. I think they're really reassuring words, hopefully, for delegates on the call. And my final point then, I guess, thinking about staff that are doing this kind of work and helping to support these young people. Finally, do you have any suggestions for them around self-care for themselves? Because obviously I can imagine it's it's challenging, it's sensitive, and there may be their own personal triggers and experiences as well. So yeah, any self-care tips for staff?
Sorry, my connection froze for a moment, but I think I've just caught up with where you're at, Natalie. Self-care for staff. We think in the toolkits around micro holidays. Sometimes we just need a moment to take a breath. And are there things that give you just a moment away from the stress of what you've been carrying? Is it looking out of the window at the sky for 30 seconds? Is it looking at a photo that brings back you to somewhere that feels calm and a lovely memory? Is it listening to a song quickly? Those micro holidays, they don't change everything. They don't make it all go away, but they can just give you a moment of respite, as well as then finding bigger things that fit into your life that have value for you. You know, I could give you a top 5 list, but they'd be my top 5 list and not yours. So what are the things that are valuable to you and they fit in with the things that are important to you? And then trying to build them in to your routine rather than waiting for your well-being to slip, to try and make those part of. And that's really difficult. You know, those of you who work in schools, you know, there's insurmountable pressure at times and a workload higher than many other professions have. But thinking, what can I fit in that is meaningful to me, as opposed to what I read on a website, the top 5 things to do. That would be my kind of first tips there.
Yeah, I think peer support, I know that's been vital for us at Nest. You know, we've been lucky, we do get access to supervision, which I think staff have found really helpful. But, you know, senior leadership team, but also your colleagues. I know we're all, when you're teaching or in schools, you are on the go all the time. You are busy, and you think, I haven't got time to eat, and I haven't got time to have a conversation. But I will often think, right, I'm just going to pop down and pop in on that person and say, how's your day gone? Or make that time to spend 10 minutes in the staff room, have a cup of tea, even if I don't finish it. They are so important. And I think that's the thing that we always kind of push aside because we're just so busy and there are other more important things to do. And I think sometimes teaching, you can be notoriously bad for not kind of taking care of yourself. And with this group in particular, it's so important. And as Beck says, don't wait till you start to feel like you're struggling. Try and fit that in. I know some of our staff just make sure they go out for a walk for 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be a long time. It's kind of actually actively fitting that in.
Thank you both so much. I'm going to end it there now. We're coming up to 6 p.m. But yeah, thank you so much, Beck. Thank you so much, Beth, for your contributions this evening. I found it really, really interesting, very inspiring, so much to take away. And yeah, thank you so much to Luwam as well for her excellent conversation and tips about her experiences. So to the audience, thank you also for attending. We will be in touch soon with a follow-up information. We'll send you some links. If there was any questions that we weren't able to address this evening, we will also follow up and try and answer those. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.